So just a couple things. Obviously, today is cut down day. There's always one practice where your numbers are the fewest for every team, and it's this day because a number of the players that have been waived have to clear waivers. And so tomorrow's practice, we'll be able to have hopefully 16 practice squad players in addition to the 53. I'm not going to go through right now all the different transactions because there's been so many. What time did they come out? All right, so 5 our time. I think tomorrow will be a better day to answer maybe specific questions relative to a player or decision. And then I think I said this to you guys a year ago. Those first 2 or 3 weeks of the season are very fluid. Like activity begins to calm a little bit, week 3 and 4, and then you get your normal transactions throughout the year. So, it's always a difficult day, and yet, you're spending time with a lot of different players. So, any questions with today?
You talked obviously about liking this team. Did you, as you went through the process of getting down to 53, was this as you talk about different decisions? I mean, how do you, I guess, feel?
One thing that was noticeable. I would say, look, our first year, I can't tell you the length of the meeting. There's always, George and I are meeting daily leading up into, call it the final meeting the night before, right? I can't tell you an hour, 2 hours. Last year, hour, 2 hours. But last night was closer to 6 hours. I mean, there was a lot of discussion, film. It was very evident that we're deeper, and I would say just strictly based on the length of the meeting and the process itself, that was very clear. And I think it was evident in the preseason games as you watched them when the second wave or the third wave went in, you saw good football.
Did much change at all with the last preseason game, or were you pretty much fairly?
Good question. I think. Look, the last game helped us in a number of different ways, and maybe more relative to the practice squad than maybe even the active roster. So. I think the last game was important for certain players, and I would say probably more relative to the practice squad than maybe the active.
Sean, what did you guys see Granny Reed when he was coming out of Utah?
So we saw, a draftable player. It's interesting because both with Reed and Bailey, they were on the phone, heading somewhere, 6 teams, and I would say identically an hour and a half with me, emailing them information relative to free agent guys that make rosters. Everyone can say, hey, free agents have a great shot at making our team, and yet we had a history. Our scouts did a great job of putting together 17 years 18, 19 years with me as a head coach, and then getting that information. So the process with those two players, I felt like was almost identical. I can't recall the teams, but we flipped them, and man, you're putting Greg Penner on the phone with them. You have the whole scouting room, stand up, and you're being creative, because what's so unique, the draft ends, and here is this hour and a half period where, like, there's just so much happening, and trying to organize it and prioritize it to where you're signing the highest graded players first while you're on the phone maybe with plan B or C. It's not an exact science. It's a challenge in when you can. The good thing is you can Zoom players before the draft. You can bring players in. Sometimes we'll bring players in that we feel like we already know about the makeup and the mental, but a lot, for a player to visit a facility and then go home and then get a call after the draft, there's a comfort level maybe that didn't exist if he didn't visit. So sometimes we'll use some 30 visits for priority free agents if they don't get drafted. But it certainly isn't an exact science either, and now tonight, it'll usually there's a turnaround from the league of about a couple hours. We benefit a little bit because we get the list, and if you get the list East Coast time, you're going to be midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. You get the list our time. We've got assigned personnel to teams, and you're just paying attention to. This was Taysom Hill, watching film of Max McCaffrey, and then I call Ireland in, who's the quarterback, and I think Max we were good with signing to the practice squad, but we put a claim in on Taysom. We were claiming 11, and so you really want to pay attention to, and that's a relatively short period of time considering the volume of players that immediately become available. And so, look, there's some positions that would be much more difficult maybe for a player, for us, to actually claim someone, then someone else has got to leave. And so there's certain positions that I always ask the question, all right, I'm released, and what position do I play that has the best chance to make our team? Which is basically like, where might a guy be able to come in? And so that question this year is a little bit fewer than a year before, 2 years, and yet you still want to pay attention to the list.
Coach, you went heavy on the defensive line. Does that just speak to how you value that position in the trenches?
Yeah, and the one thing we try to get away from, it's easy to say here the league averages on defense with an odd front. Most teams keep, and then on offense. But I think, and then even with the practice squad, we still have to value the player over the quota. And so remember, it wasn't too long ago we had 53 with 6 guys on a practice squad. So, we pitch in if it's a defensive period. There might be not only the offensive players but some backup defensive players putting a jersey on and helping and facilitate the practice. So I know that there were some real benefits to COVID, and we got the practice squads to 16, and then the ability for these guys, I really look at it as a 69-man roster now. It's much different than what it used to be like. I mean, these guys are coming up, these guys are playing, and more players are getting developed by the specific teams. So I think we've really benefited the league in general and the players in general from the expanded roster. The locker room that you guys go in, used to, after training camp, that center island would be gone. And then, pretty soon it stayed just because of the additional practice squad players and the size of your team. So the same thought goes into putting together your practice squad. We'd like certain numbers, and yet talent still trumps it.
Sean, what do you pressure on your punter? Are you going to go through the growing pains and just keep developing? He's got too much talent, type of thing with him.
Yeah. And listen, and keep working with him and developing him, and that's part of it. That's part of it. But I think we're going to be happy with him and his ability, and look, it seems to always be that first punt, and so when we're going to create some situations where right in the middle of a practice we'll have a punt, and that before we get to a punt period, and so because the reality of it is that you get an at bat, you don't get like 4 at bats, 5 at bats, and so trying to create those singular events for him, I think will help too.
Sean, obviously this is a light attended practice by rule. What can you get from these 3 days as you start to build the roster back up? Help you start fast, maybe?
We installed today. Today was Red Zone 2 installation. So it's the second round of installation, more red zone offense. We practiced tight red, high red, fringe, and then we went through a few situations, end of game. And we're installing tomorrow. So you can do that, and it doesn't mean you have to be in full pads or, tomorrow we'll be in helmets and shoulder pads, but there'll be an installation. There'll be more players, and we'll have a better idea of how things unfolded. I would say more than half the team really understanding the claiming process. The vested veterans are terminated. They can go to any team they want. They become free agents. Those that aren't are waived, and then there's a claiming order, and then the claiming order obviously is the draft order. And so if you're Tennessee and you want to claim a player, there's a pretty good likelihood, 100% likelihood you're getting the player. And if you're the Eagles, you better hope no one else claims the player. And explaining that to him, I never knew that. I'd been, cut 3 or 4 times. I just knew I had to leave. I didn't. That's all I knew. So I think explaining that to him, and then the other thing that's real important, because it happens, is as they leave, I always say, look, the door's never fully closed or fully open. So many different occasions where I've met with a player, and a month later, 2 weeks later, days later, the player's back in the building. That happens, and you just see that over time.
Sean, you had the.
Didn't you say if you put anybody on IR?
I think Burton went to IR. That'd be the one. He had surgery on his hamstring, and that would be it right now.
That's the season for him, or to designate?
Yeah. No, he was put on IR. Yeah, not return.
You said a couple weeks ago you were waiting to sort of see the separation of the running back room. When approximately did you start to see daylight before in that room, or was that one of the positions that was really difficult? Yeah.
It was difficult, and it was still a sum total. In these meetings, periodically, 2 weeks ago, I would oftentimes say, all right, if we're playing this weekend, I want to hear both sides of the ball talk about the starting lineup, the backups, and so I probably asked that question maybe 3 times during camp. All right, we're playing in 4 days, and then George and I would meet on it. The good thing is, in working with George, is throughout the whole process, last night late, you're seeing it because you've been talking about it throughout camp. It's not like you just begin talking about it yesterday, and so Now, the thing we can't control is this period, this 24-hour period before tomorrow. You know, we can't control if a player's claimed, and so you wait. And I think, look, on average, if you do the studies, I don't know, I think it's somewhere between 25 and 27 players each time final cut down get claimed.
Sean, how do you feel about the depth in this inside linebacker room? You know, right now, I know the kind of injuries at the top.
Yeah.
Any plans to
Good.
acquire there?
Good. And look, again, we haven't talked about practice squad and all those things.
How would you describe your philosophy on whether to keep 2 or 3 quarterbacks? Because you've done it both ways since you've been.
Yeah, and so look, Sam's the guy that we want back, and now the league a few years back put in a rule that allowed you to dress a third, but he had to be on your active roster, right? Every team in this league, when the season starts, is going to have 3 in the building. And the question is just simply, what's the third in the building? Is he active or practice squad? I think a lot of it varies when you look at the other components of your roster.
Is your hope most of your practice squad are guys you've had in this camp?
Yeah, and yet it's a great question. It's hard. Team A has a player that they're releasing and they're hoping to put on their practice squad, and we like them. Certainly we can call the agent and try to convince them. But once the player has gotten familiar with the defense and the offense, we had one situation came up. Chase Daniel was at Washington, and he'd been released and was getting ready to sign a practice squad agreement with Washington. We had talked with the agent. I think Chase, there was something about, I think he was maybe hoping if it was possible to come to us, but then there had to be some throw-ins. And at one point, I was on the phone with him, and he was just outside the head coach's office, and I said, just leave the building. And he said, well, I said, Chase, just leave the building. We'll get you to the active roster, at least 3 games, you know, and you're going to be, and to his credit, he just left the building. And so that's harder to do.
You touched on this before, but your fullback plan?
Yeah, I think you'll begin to see it develop.
What kind of growth did you see from Frank Crum over the course of training camp this season?
Man, just the athleticism. He's been a player. We've had 3 teams call on him, and it's the upside and the size and the athleticism, his feet, his protection. Like, you know, we have a clear and a really good vision for what we think he can become, and that ceiling is high. And so, and you can tell there are other teams doing their homework the same way.
So you talked about avoiding regrets on touchdowns.
Sure.
The guy goes with the first player somewhere else. Does that come to mind more when you have a deeper roster in touchdowns?
Sure it does. Yeah. And it's more likely to happen if you have a deeper roster. It's more like, you know, in other words, I had mentioned earlier that, hey, I think there'll be some players that play on other teams' rosters, and one was Devon in a trade, but that's part of the deal. And but that's why the meeting last night was long.
Sean, when you look back last year, take Audrey, 5th round, estimate. Was it the development that didn't match the vision there? Was it the backfield?
Well, look, sometimes it's a combination of things, you know. And look, I had a long visit with him today, and his career's not by any chance over. You know, so that's really not uncommon, you know, for a 5th round selection. And yet, there's also a credit to Bidet's experience, but also some of his versatility. Clearly, when you add and have the ability to sign a Dobbins and draft a Harvey, you know, that room changed immediately, and the competition changed immediately.
Coach, when it comes to talking to individual players, you just mentioned you did that with Chase Daniels. Is that a common thing for you to do over these next 24 hours, or?
That was unusual. Chase played at South Lake Carroll High School, right down the street from where I lived when I was coaching the Cowboys, and my daughter was a cheerleader for the 3rd or 4th grade, and they would allow the junior cheerleaders to cheer in one game. So I'd probably seen him play 2 or 3 high school games. At one point, I think it was the first time, I guarantee it was the first time, our snapper, holder, and kicker all played at South Lake Carroll for the same team. And that's kind of unusual. So that story was different. That's why, unfortunately, there's a number of our guys that are waiting out this period that we have a great vision for on the practice squad. That was a unique situation relative to the offense, and I think Chase saw maybe some Drew in himself in the offense, you know, and there was something that pulled him there. But that was a little bit different. All right, one more.
Now, do you think the Jets, because Moose is there, might be keeping an eye on?
Oh, always. Yeah, always. Whenever you have staff, look, Declan Doyle goes to Chicago. He's got a great feel, a better feel for the individual players on our roster. Aaron Glenn, not so much. Mooj, definitely. Banjo, you know, so when personnel leave, just like when we hire, that insight is valuable. That helps. It helps confirm maybe beliefs one way or another.
Do you put any 1% into thinking about the number of people that just this offseason have gone other places when you're making decisions, or you just make?
I think you make the decisions. You don't make a decision thinking, you know, that's a good question, but I think you go crazy trying to. We have an idea of maybe teams. You always keep track of teams' needs, you know, and so, but you still have to look at your own team. And I say it all the time. It's about the right 53. And it's, you know, it's an imperfect business sometimes, but getting the right 53 is really important.